Most women scream. Some throw vases. Others beg. But when Julian Thorne, the city's most arrogant tech mogul, handed his wife the divorce papers, she didn't do any of that. She didn't shed a single tear. She simply picked up a pen, signed away 10 years of marriage, and walked out into the rain with nothing but a suitcase. Julian thought he had won. He thought he had discarded a boring housewife to climb the social ladder. He was wrong. 3 months later, the doors to the most exclusive gala in New York opened, and the woman who walked in didn't just stop the conversation, she stopped Julian's heart. Because she wasn't alone. And the man holding her hand was the one person Julian feared most in the world. This is the story of the quietest exit and the loudest return in history. The grandfather clock in the corner of the study chimed 11 times, the sound heavy and mournful, echoing off the mahogany walls of the penthouse on Fifth Avenue. Outside, the New York City rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the lights of the skyline into streaks of gold and charcoal. Julian Thorne stood by the wet bar, swirling an aged scotch in a crystal tumbler. He checked his reflection in the dark glass of the window. At 42, he was in the prime of his life, tall, sharp-jawed, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than most people's cars. He was the CEO of Thorne Data Systems, a company on the verge of a historic IPO. He was powerful, he was wealthy, and he was bored. He turned to look at the woman sitting in the high-backed leather chair across the room. Elena. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect, her face unreadable. She was wearing a simple gray cardigan and slacks, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. She looked, Julian thought with a pang of irritation, utterly invisible, like part of the furniture. "Did you hear what I said, Elena?" Julian asked, his voice smooth, practiced. It was the voice he used for board meetings and hostile takeovers. "I heard you, Julian," she said. Her voice was soft, devoid of the hysteria he had braced himself for. "You want a divorce." Julian took a sip of scotch, the amber liquid burning pleasantly. "It's not just that I want one. It's that it is necessary. We're evolving in different directions. My profile is rising. The IPO is next month. I need a partner who can navigate that world. Someone with energy. Someone with spark." He didn't say the name, but it hung in the air between them. Monica. Monica De Laurentiis. 26 years old, the daughter of a steel magnate and a socialite whose Instagram following was larger than the population of some countries. Monica was fire and noise. Elena was silence and dust. "I see," Elena said. She looked down at the thick document sitting on the desk in front of her. "And these are the terms?" "My lawyers drew them up this morning," Julian said, stepping closer. He tried to sound generous. "I'm being fair, Elena. The prenuptial agreement we signed 10 years ago limits you to a fixed payout, but I've added a stipend. Enough to get you set up in a condo somewhere quiet. Upstate, perhaps. Or maybe back in Ohio." He watched her carefully. This was the moment. The explosion. 10 years of marriage. She had supported him when Thorne Data was just 2 laptops in a garage. She had made the coffee, organized the files, and managed the accounts when they couldn't afford an accountant. But she had never been the face. She had never been the visionary. Elena reached out and opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon. Clause 4, waiver of spousal support. Clause 9, non-disclosure agreement regarding Thorne Data Systems operations. Clause 15, immediate vacation of the primary residence. It was brutal. It was a dismissal, not a settlement. It erased her from his life as if she were a temporary contractor whose project had ended. "The apartment," Elena said, her finger tracing the line. "You want me out by tomorrow?" "Monica is moving her things in on Friday," Julian admitted, not bothering to hide it anymore. "I'm hosting the pre-IPO strategy dinner here on Saturday. I need the place ready." Elena looked up. Her eyes were a strange shade of hazel, usually warm, but tonight they looked like shattered glass. "Saturday. The dinner with the Japanese investors." "Yes. How did you know about the Japanese investors?" Julian frowned. He hadn't mentioned that detail. "I read the schedule on the shared calendar before you locked me out of it," she said simply. "Right." Julian straightened his cuffs. "Look, Elena, don't make this hard. If you contest this, I have litigation teams on retainer that will drag this out until you don't have a dime left to pay your own lawyer. Just sign it. Take the check. Go start a new life. You've always wanted to paint or garden or whatever it is you do while I'm working." Elena stared at him for a long moment. The silence stretched tense and suffocating. Julian gripped his glass tighter. Here it comes, he thought. The screaming, the begging. Elena reached into her pocket. Julian flinched slightly. She pulled out a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. She clicked it. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Without a single word of protest, without asking for an extra $1, Elena Vance leaned forward and signed her name at the bottom of the page. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. Scratch, scratch, scratch. She closed the folder and pushed it across the mahogany desk toward him. "It's done," she said. She stood up. Julian blinked, stunned. He felt a weird hollow sensation in his chest. Not regret relief, surely, but also confusion. It was too easy. "You're okay with this," he stammered. Elena looked at him, and for a second, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone watching a child play with a loaded gun. "You've always been good at getting what you want, Julian," she said softly. "I hope you're prepared for what comes with it." "What is that supposed to mean?" "I'll be packed by morning," she said, ignoring his question. She turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. "Elena," he called out. She stopped her hand on the brass knob. "Take the Mercedes," he said, a sudden burst of pity washing over him. "As a bonus." She didn't look back. "I don't need the car, Julian. I ordered a taxi." She walked out, closing the door with a soft click. Julian stood alone in his study. He looked at the signature on the paper. Elena Vance. It was over. He was free. He downed the rest of the scotch in one gulp and pulled out his phone to text Monica. "It's done. She didn't even fight. I'm all yours." He didn't notice that outside the storm was getting worse. And he certainly didn't notice that on the desk where Elena had been sitting she had left a small velvet pouch. Inside was her wedding ring and a small silver USB drive. The next morning the penthouse felt massive and sterile. When Julian woke up, Elena was already gone. He walked through the apartment, checking the rooms. The guest room she had been sleeping in for the last month was stripped bare. The closet was empty. There was no note on the pillow, no lipstick written on the mirror. It was as if she had never existed. "Good riddance," Julian muttered, grabbing his espresso. He felt lighter, unburdened. Today was a big day. He had a final meeting with the board regarding the valuation of the company before the IPO roadshow began. He arrived at the Thorn Data Systems headquarters at 9:00 a.m. sharp. The glass tower in Financial District was a monument to his ego. He strode through the lobby, nodding to security. "Morning, Mr. Thorn," the guard said. "Good morning, Jerry." He took the private elevator to the 40th floor. His executive assistant, a nervous young man named Marcus, was waiting for him with an iPad. "Mr. Thorn, the legal team received the signed divorce papers via courier an hour ago. They're filing them with the court now. Fast track, just as you requested." "Excellent," Julian said, walking into his office. "And the flowers for Ms. De Laurentiis. Sent to her apartment. 3 dozen white roses." "Perfect." Julian sat at his desk, firing up his triple monitor setup. "Let's get to work. Pull up the Project Chimera files. I need to review the code architecture before the board meeting at noon." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, that's actually what I needed to speak to you about." Julian looked up, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" "I tried to access the Chimera repository this morning to prepare the slide deck." Marcus swallowed hard. "I'm locked out." Julian laughed. "Don't be an idiot, Marcus. You probably caps-locked your password. Here, I'll do it." Julian logged into the mainframe with his master administrative credentials. He navigated to the secure server where the core algorithm of their company, the AI learning model that made Thorne data worth billions, was stored. He clicked the folder. Access denied. A red box popped up on the screen. Julian blinked. He typed his password again. Access denied. User privileges revoked. What the hell? Julian slammed his fist on the desk. Get it down here. Now. 10 minutes later, the head of IT, a sweating man named David, was typing furiously on Julian's keyboard. Well, Julian barked, pacing behind him. It's weird. Mr. Thorne, David said, his voice trembling. The files are there. They haven't been deleted, but the encryption key has been changed. Changed by who? I'm the only one with admin access. Not exactly, sir, David said, pointing to the log. There was a secondary admin account. It's been dormant for years, mostly used for remote debugging and patches. We thought it was an automated system demon. Which account? User ID EV Ghost. Julian froze. EV, Elena Vance. His mind flashed back to the early days. The garage. Julian was the face, the salesman, the big picture guy. But the code, the nitty-gritty syntax that made the software actually work, he had always been sloppy with it. Elena had been a mathematics major before she dropped out to support him. She used to sit up late at night proofreading his code. She just fixed typos, Julian whispered to himself. She didn't know how to code complex algorithms. Sir, David asked. Override it, Julian snapped. Hack it. Break the encryption. We can't, David said, looking pale. This encryption is military grade. It's a cascading cipher. If we force it, the data self-corrupts. We need the key. Julian felt a cold sweat prickling his neck. The board meeting was in 2 hours. He had to present the finished Chimera protocol. If he couldn't access it, the investors would smell blood. He grabbed his phone and dialed Elena's number. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. He cursed and threw the phone onto the leather couch. She had cut him off. But this was sabotage. This was war. Find her, Julian hissed at Marcus. I don't care what it costs. Hire a private investigator. Find out where she went. She thinks she can hold my company hostage. She's going to regret the day she met me. Meanwhile, 40 miles away. A sleek black Bentley Continental flew down the highway toward a private airfield in Teterboro. The windows were tinted dark enough to hide the passenger from the world. Elena sat in the back seat. She had changed out of her gray cardigan. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat and sunglasses. Her posture was relaxed, her legs crossed. The partition window slid down. The driver, a man with a thick neck and a scar running down his jaw, looked in the rearview mirror. We're 10 minutes out, Mrs. Vance, he said. His accent was British-clipped and professional. It's Ms. Vance now, Arthur, she corrected him gently. Or just Elena. Apologies, Elena. Mr. Sterling's jet is fueled and ready. He is waiting for you on the tarmac. Elena looked out the window at the passing trees. She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek titanium smartphone, not the old cracked iPhone Julian allowed her to have. She tapped the screen. A notification popped up. Alert failed login attempt. Admin console. Thorne Data Systems. Location New York, NY. User J. Thorne. Elena smirked. It was a cold, dangerous expression that Julian had never seen. She typed a quick command into the terminal app on her phone. Command initiate partial lockout. Display timer 72 hours. She wanted him to sweat. She wanted him to realize exactly how much of his genius had actually been her midnight corrections, her silent optimization, her unseen hand guiding his clumsy ambition. He thought she was just a wife. He forgot she was the architect. The car slowed as it turned onto the tarmac. A massive Gulfstream G650 waited its engines, whining softly. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was a man. He was older than Julian, perhaps in his late 50s, but he radiated a different kind of power. He wasn't flashy. He wore a dark navy suit, no tie, and his silver hair was swept back. This was Silas Sterling, the billionaire of the shadows. He owned shipping lines, rare earth mines, and half the real estate in London, yet he rarely gave interviews. As the car stopped, Arthur opened the door. Elena stepped out into the wind. Silas walked forward, ignoring his security detail, and took Elena's hand. He didn't shake it. He brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You're late, Elle," Silas said, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "I had to sign some papers," Elena replied, taking her sunglasses off. "Is it done?" "It's done. He thinks I'm going to Ohio to knit." Silas chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. Julian Thorne always was a man who looked at the cover and never read the book. "Did you leave him the gift?" "The USB drive." "Yes, but he won't figure out the password for days. By then, we'll be in Paris." "Paris," Silas mused, offering her his arm as they walked toward the jet. And then, Elena said, looking back toward the city skyline one last time, "We come back for the charity gala. I believe I need to introduce the city to the real owner of the Chimera algorithm." Silas squeezed her hand. "It's going to be a bloodbath, my dear. I can't wait." They boarded the plane. As the door sealed shut, locking out the noise of the world, Elena finally allowed herself to relax. She wasn't the discarded wife anymore. She was the weapon Julian had foolishly thrown away, and she had just landed in the hands of his deadliest rival. The war had begun, and Julian didn't even know he was already losing. 3 weeks had passed since Elena Vance vanished into the rain, and the silence she left behind was becoming deafening inside the Thorne Data Systems tower. Julian sat in his office, the panoramic view of Manhattan offering him no comfort. His desk, usually an altar of organized chaos, was now a disaster zone of cold coffee cups and crumpled legal pads. "It happened again, didn't it?" Julian asked, not bothering to look up as David, the head of IT, shuffled into the room. David looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shirt untucked. "Yes, sir. The Chimera algorithm, it's rejecting the patch." "Rejecting it?" "It's code David. It doesn't have feelings. It can't reject things," Julian roared, throwing a pen across the room. "It's the security protocol, sir," David stammered, flinching. "Every time we try to bypass the encryption on the core learning module, the system initiates a defensive loop. It mocks us." "Mocks you. Look." David opened his tablet and cast the screen to the massive monitor on the wall. On the black screen, lines of green code scrolled by frantically. Then the scrolling stopped. A single line of text appeared in the center, blinking rhythmically. "Error 404. Architect not found. System dormant." "Architect," Julian whispered. He loosened his tie, feeling like the air conditioning had suddenly cut out. For 10 years, Julian had sold the world a story. The story was that he was the visionary, the genius coder, the next Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. He was the face on the magazine covers. But the truth was a dirty secret buried in the early days of their marriage. Julian was a brilliant salesman and a decent coder, but he lacked the patience for the complex structural architecture of AI. Elena didn't. She would sit on the floor of their cramped apartment, surrounded by textbooks on advanced calculus and neural networks, knitting code together while he slept. She called herself the janitor, cleaning up his messes. He had let her believe that. He had let himself believe it. But she wasn't the janitor. She was the architect, and he had just evicted her. "Fix it," Julian snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "I don't care if you have to rewrite the whole kernel from scratch. The IPO roadshow starts in 3 weeks. If the demo crashes in front of the investors, we are finished. We're trying, sir, but get out." As David fled the office, Julian's phone buzzed. It was Monica. "Babe, the caterer for the engagement party is asking if you prefer truffles or caviar for the appetizers. Also, I need your credit card. The limit on the black Amex was hit. Love you, XOXO. Julian stared at the text. A headache began to throb behind his left eye. 10 years ago, when money was tight, Elena would make them grilled cheese sandwiches and they would eat them on the floor, laughing about how one day they'd eat steak. She never asked for a credit card. She never cared about caviar. He typed back, "Handle it. Busy." He tossed the phone aside and buzzed his secretary. "Marcus, any word from the private investigator?" "Yes, Mr. Thorne. A report came in this morning." "And?" "They tracked a credit card usage to a small motel outside of Columbus, Ohio. A purchase for gas and a diner meal." Julian let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. Ohio. She actually went back to Ohio. He laughed a dry, humorless sound. Of course she did. She was Elena. She was predictable. She was safe. She was currently sitting in some Rust Belt diner, probably crying over a cup of coffee, regretting the moment she walked out on a billionaire. "Good," Julian said, his confidence returning. "Let her rot in Ohio. She'll come crawling back when the money runs out, and then she'll give me the password." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the ants crawling on the pavement 40 stories below. He was Julian Thorne. He always won. This was just a hiccup. But Julian was wrong. The credit card in Ohio had been used by a homeless woman Elena had met at the bus station before she left. Elena had given the woman her old card and $500 cash, telling her to buy whatever she needed. Elena wasn't in Ohio. Elena was 4,000 miles away, standing on a balcony overlooking the azure waters of the Mediterranean Sea. The villa in Monaco was carved into the cliffside, a masterpiece of white stone and glass. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. Elena sat at a glass table on the terrace, a tablet in front of her. But she wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at Silas Sterling, who was swimming laps in the infinity pool. He swam with powerful rhythmic strokes cutting through the water. For a man of 55, he was in incredible shape. But it wasn't his wealth or his fitness that intrigued Elena. It was his mind. For the last 3 weeks they had done nothing but work. Silas hadn't paraded her around or treated her like a trophy. He had treated her like a weapon he was sharpening. He pulled himself out of the pool, grabbing a towel. "How is the code coming?" he asked, drying his hair. "It's done," Elena said, tapping the screen. "I've rewritten the base layer. It's faster than the version I built for Julian. More aggressive. I call it Nemesis." Silas walked over and poured himself a glass of lemonade, offering her one. "Nemesis, the goddess of retribution. A bit on the nose, isn't it?" "I'm not trying to be subtle, Silas," Elena said, taking the glass. "Julian is going to try to launch Chimera next month. When he does, he's going to realize the engine is hollow. I want to be there when the wheels fall off." Silas sat opposite her, his expression serious. "Revenge is a powerful motivator, Elena. But it's a dirty fuel. It burns hot, but it leaves a lot of ash. Are you doing this just to hurt him? Or are you doing this because you want to build something of your own?" Elena looked out at the ocean. She thought about the 10 years she spent in Julian's shadow, the years of making herself smaller so he could feel big, the years of silence. "I'm doing it," she said slowly, "because for 10 years I was the ghost in the machine. I made him real. Now I want to show the world that the machine doesn't work without the ghost." Silas smiled a slow, predatory grin. "Good answer. Now stand up." "Why?" "Because we have a meeting with the wardrobe team in an hour, and then etiquette training." Elena frowned. "I don't need etiquette training. I know how to use a fork." "You know how to be a corporate wife," Silas corrected her. "You know how to be invisible. I need you to learn how to be the only thing people see. We are going back to New York for the Metropolitan Charity Gala. It's the biggest night of the season. Julian will be there. The press will be there. Investors will be there." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "When you walk into that room, Elena, you aren't going to be the ex-wife. You aren't going to be the victim. You are going to be a queen. And a queen doesn't just walk. She arrives. Elena stood up. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. I'm ready, she said. Silas nodded. Then let's go buy you some armor. New York City in the autumn is a playground for the elite, and no event was more coveted than the Metropolitan Charity Gala. Tickets were $50,000 a plate, and even that couldn't guarantee you a seat. You had to be invited. Julian Thorne stood in front of the full-length mirror in his penthouse adjusting his bow tie. He looked tired. The dark circles under his eyes were carefully concealed with makeup, but the stress was etched into the lines of his mouth. The last month had been a nightmare. The ghost in the system was getting more aggressive. Files would disappear and reappear corrupted. The engineering team was on the verge of mutiny, and the Japanese investors the key to the IPO were getting cold feet. They had heard rumors. Mr. Tanaka will be there tonight, Julian muttered to his reflection. I just need 5 minutes with him. I charm him, I seal the deal, the stock soars, and I can buy a new engineering team to fix Elena's mess. Julian? Look at me. Monica burst into the room. She was wearing a dress that could only be described as loud. It was bright red, covered in sequins with a plunging neckline that left very little to the imagination. It was a dress designed to get likes on Instagram, not to impress serious old money investors. It's striking, Julian said, forcing a smile. I know, right, it's custom. I'm going to be the hottest woman there. She spun around, nearly knocking over a vase. Are you ready? The limo is downstairs. I tipped off the paparazzi that we're coming. I want the cover of page 6 tomorrow. Julian felt a wave of exhaustion. Monica, please. Keep it low-key tonight. I need to talk to serious business people. Don't do anything crazy. You're no fun, she touted, grabbing his arm. Come on. Let's go show them who owns this city. They took the elevator down. As they stepped out of the building, the flashes of cameras blinded them. Julian, is it true the IPO is delayed? Monica, who are you wearing? Julian, any comment on the rumors of a security breach at Thorne Data? Julian ignored the questions about the company, smiling that practiced shark-like smile. He guided Monica into the back of the stretch limousine. As the car navigated the gridlock toward the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Julian poured himself a drink from the car's bar. His hands were shaking slightly. Stop worrying, Monica said, scrolling through her phone. You're stressed. You need to relax. Oh my God, look at this. Someone just tweeted that Silas Sterling's jet landed in JFK this afternoon. Julian froze. Sterling? Yeah, the spooky British guy. I thought he never left Europe. He doesn't, Julian said, his mind racing. Silas Sterling was a legend. A corporate raider who bought failing companies, stripped them, and rebuilt them into empires. If Sterling was in New York, it meant he smelled blood in the water. Does he know about Thorne Data? Julian wondered. Is he coming for me? The car pulled up to the red carpet. The noise was deafening. A sea of photographers and reporters lined the velvet ropes. Julian stepped out, offering his hand to Monica. She soaked up the attention, posing blowing kisses. Julian tried to look powerful, but he felt like an imposter in his own skin. They walked up the famous steps of the Met. Inside, the great hall had been transformed into a glittering ballroom. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Julian scanned the room. He saw the CEO of Goldman Sachs. He saw a famous Hollywood actress. And there in the corner, holding a glass of champagne, was Mr. Tanaka. Go get a drink, Monica, Julian said, disengaging his arm. I have to work. Fine, she huffed, heading toward the bar. Julian smoothed his jacket and began to walk toward Tanaka. He had his pitch ready. He was halfway across the room when the music suddenly changed. The string quartet stopped playing the polite Mozart they had been cycling through. A hush fell over the room. It started near the entrance and rippled outward like a wave. People stopped talking, heads turned. Glasses were lowered. Julian stopped. He looked back toward the massive entrance doors. The doors opened. First came the flashes from outside a thunderstorm of photography that was twice as intense as when Julian had arrived. Then a man stepped through the doorway. Silas Sterling. He looked regal in a tuxedo that was cut with razor-sharp precision. He radiated an aura of calm, absolute control. The room whispered. Silas Sterling never came to these things. But then Silas turned slightly and offered his hand to someone behind him. And she stepped into the light. The breath caught in Julian's throat. It was Elena. But it wasn't the Elena he knew. It wasn't the woman in the gray cardigan who made coffee and signed papers without a fight. This woman was a vision. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged every curve of her body, shimmering like the night sky. It was elegant, sophisticated, and devastatingly sexy. Her dark hair, usually in a bun, cascaded down her back in loose, glossy waves. Around her neck hung a necklace of sapphires and diamonds that looked heavy enough to sink a ship, jewels that caught the light and threw it back with blinding intensity. But it wasn't the dress. It wasn't the jewels. It was her face. Her chin was lifted. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the room with a look of amused detachment. She didn't look like a discarded wife. She looked like the owner of the building. "My God," someone whispered near Julian. "Who is that? Is that Julian Thorne's wife?" "No," someone else corrected. "That's Silas Sterling's partner." Julian felt like he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't move. He watched as Silas leaned in and whispered something to Elena. She threw her head back and laughed, a genuine musical laugh that echoed in the silent hall. Then she looked across the room. Her eyes locked onto Julian's. For a second the world narrowed down to just the two of them. Julian expected to see anger. He expected to see sadness. But there was nothing. No hate. No love. Just cold, clinical recognition. She looked at him the way a scientist looks at a bug under a microscope. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, then dismissed him, turning her attention back to Silas. They began to walk down the stairs into the crowd, the sea of billionaires and celebrities parting for them like the Red Sea. Julian stood rooted to the spot. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Monica appeared at his elbow holding a martini. "Who is that bitch?" she hissed, her voice shrill. "Why is everyone staring at her? That dress is so last season." Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. He watched as Elena and Silas moved through the crowd, heading straight for the one person Julian needed to impress. They were heading toward Mr. Tanaka. "No," Julian whispered. He started to move, pushing past a waiter. He had to stop this. He didn't know what game they were playing, but he knew one thing. The quiet woman who had signed the papers and left in the rain was gone. The woman in the midnight blue dress was something else entirely. She was the storm he had failed to predict, and she was just getting started. The distance between Julian and Mr. Tanaka was only 30 feet, but it felt like a minefield. Julian moved with a forced purpose, his smile plastered on like a mask of cracked porcelain. Beside him, Monica was complaining about her shoes, but Julian's ears were ringing with a high-pitched frequency that drowned her out. He had to get to Tanaka first. He had to control the narrative. "Mr. Tanaka," Julian exclaimed, extending his hand as he reached the small circle of Japanese investors. "So glad you could make it. I trust your flight was comfortable." Hiroshi Tanaka, the venerable head of the Tanaka Venture Group, turned slowly. He was a man of immense dignity, wearing a tuxedo that looked as old and respectable as the hills. He looked at Julian's outstretched hand, paused for a fraction of a second too long, and then shook it briefly. "Mr. Thorne," Tanaka said, his voice polite but cool, "it is an impressive gathering. Only the best for our partners." Julian beamed, sweating slightly under his collar. "I wanted to speak to you about the Series B allocation. I know you had some concerns about the timeline, but I can assure you the Chimera algorithm is performing beyond expectations. We are ready to revolutionize the market." Tanaka sipped his mineral water. Is that so? My analysts heard rumors of stability issues. Competitor sabotage. Julian lied smoothly. Jealousy is the tax of success, as they say. The system is flawless. Is it? The voice didn't come from Tanaka. It came from behind Julian. It was a voice he knew better than his own heartbeat, but tonight it carried a timbre of steel he had never heard before. Julian turned. Elena stood there, flanked by Silas Sterling. Up close, the transformation was even more terrifying. The midnight blue velvet of her dress seemed to absorb the light around her, making her the singularity of the room. But it was her eyes, clear hazel and utterly devoid of fear, that froze him. "Elena," Julian said, his voice tight. "I see you found a date." "Hello, Julian," she said. She didn't look at him. She looked past him directly at Mr. Tanaka. She bowed deeply, a perfect traditional Japanese bow that signaled immense respect. "Tanaka-san," she said in flawless Japanese. "Hisashiburi desu ne. O genki desu ka?" "It has been a long time. Are you well?" Tanaka's eyes widened. A genuine smile broke across his face. He bowed back lower than he had for Julian. "Vansa-san, I did not know you would be here. It has been, what, 3 years since our video conference?" Julian stared. "You know each other?" Elena turned to Julian, her expression one of mild pity. "Who do you think walked Mr. Tanaka's team through the initial kernel architecture 3 years ago, Julian? You were on a golf trip in Aspen. I spent 4 nights on a Zoom call with Tokyo explaining the recursive learning nodes." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered that week. He had told the board he had smoothed over the technical concerns. He had forgotten Elena was even in the apartment that week, let alone working. "A secretary can translate," Julian sneered, trying to belittle her. "But that doesn't mean she understands the business." Silas Sterling stepped forward. He placed a protective yet possessive hand on the small of Elena's back. "She isn't a secretary, Julian. And she isn't just my date. May I introduce you to the new Chief Technology Officer of Sterling Vance Dynamics?" The room seemed to tilt. "Sterling Vance," Julian choked out. "We registered the corporation in London yesterday," Silas said, his voice booming enough for the nearby reporters to hear. "We are focusing on ethical AI development, and our proprietary code, well, let's just say it's the original uncorrupted version of what you're trying to sell." The crowd around them was growing. Photographers were jostling for position. This was the showdown of the decade. Julian laughed, a desperate braying sound. "You're bluffing. Elena doesn't have the code. I own Thorn data. I own everything she ever touched while we were married. It's in the prenup." Elena took a step closer to him. The scent of her perfume, something dark like sandalwood and rain, filled his nose. "You own the files, Julian," she said softly so only he, Silas, and Tanaka could hear. "You own the hard drives. You own the servers. But you don't own the logic." She turned to Tanaka. "Tanaka-san, ask him about the ghost protocol in the Chimera build. Ask him what happens when the latency buffer exceeds 40 milliseconds." Tanaka looked at Julian. "Mr. Thorne." "What happens?" Julian opened his mouth. He looked around. "It adjusts. The algorithm, it optimizes." "It crashes," Elena corrected him. "It enters a catastrophic feedback loop because the bridge code, the part I wrote to stabilize your clumsy front end, requires a manual handshake every 72 hours. A handshake you don't have the password for." She checked her diamond-encrusted watch. "Which, by my calculation, is due in exactly—" She paused dramatically. 14 hours. Julian felt sweat trickling down his back. "She's lying," he hissed at Tanaka. "She's a bitter ex-wife trying to tank the stock. The system is autonomous." "If it is autonomous," Silas interjected, his voice smooth as silk, "then you wouldn't mind if Mr. Tanaka waits until tomorrow afternoon to sign the Series B papers, just to be safe." Julian was trapped. If he said no, he looked guilty. If he said yes, the timer would run out and the system would crash. Julian stammered. I think waiting is wise. Tanaka said, his face closing up like a vault door. He turned his back on Julian and faced Elena. Vance-san, I would be very interested to hear more about this Sterling Vance initiative. Perhaps we can discuss it over dinner. I would be delighted, Elena said. Wait, Monica screeched, suddenly realizing the attention was shifting away from her. She grabbed Julian's arm. Julian, do something! She's stealing your deal! Julian shoved Monica off him hard. She stumbled back, spilling her martini onto a passing waiter. Shut up, Monica, he roared. The room went silent. The flashbulbs popped like fireworks. Julian Thorne, the golden boy, losing his temper in the middle of the Met Gala. Elena looked at him one last time. It was a look of finality. Goodbye, Julian, she said. Enjoy the party. I hear the champagne is excellent, even if the company is depreciating. She took Silas's arm, and together they walked away toward the private dining room with Mr. Tanaka. Julian was left standing in the center of the room alone in a crowd of hundreds. He could feel the eyes on him, the whispers, the judgment. He pulled out his phone. Messages, 50 unread from David IT Head. Top message system, critical. Please respond. Julian stared at the screen. The glass of the phone cracked under the pressure of his grip. He turned and ran toward the exit, leaving Monica shouting obscenities at his back. The hangover was brutal, but the reality was worse. Monday morning broke over New York City with a gray, oppressive smog. Inside the boardroom of Thorne Data Systems, the atmosphere was toxic. Julian hadn't slept. He was wearing the same tuxedo shirt from the gala, unbuttoned sleeves rolled up. He paced the length of the conference table. The board of directors sat around him, their faces grim, illuminated by the red glare of the stock ticker on the wall screen. TDS Thorne Data Systems, 1450. 42%. It's a free fall, said Marcus, the CFO. He was trembling. The video of you screaming at your fiancée at the gala went viral at 2:00 a.m. Then the rumors about Tanaka pulling out hit the Asian markets at 4:00 a.m. By the time the NYSE opened, everyone was dumping the stock. Screw the stock. Julian slammed his hand on the table. Where is the system? Where is Chimera? David, the head of IT, was sitting in the corner looking like a man awaiting execution. He had his laptop open. We can't stop it, sir. What do you mean you can't stop it? The 72-hour timer Mrs. Vance, Elena mentioned? David whispered. It ran out 10 minutes ago. And the system didn't crash, sir. Julian stopped pacing. It didn't. She was bluffing. He let out a manic laugh. I knew it. She was just trying to scare the investors away. No, sir. David said, his voice hollow. It didn't crash because there's nothing left to crash. The system, it uninstalled itself. Uninstalled. It's a scorched earth protocol, David explained, turning the laptop so the board could see. The screen was black with a single ASCII image of a ghost in the center. It appears the core algorithm wasn't stored on our servers. It was cloud-based, hosted on a private server chain that was linked to Elena's personal biometric key. When the handshake failed, the server severed the connection. Restore the backups, Julian screamed. The backups were mirroring the cloud, David said. They're empty, Julian. It's all gone. We have the user interface, the graphics, the marketing materials, but the brain, the AI, it's gone. The silence in the room was absolute. Thorne Data Systems was a shell. They had sold a Ferrari, but the engine had just vanished. This is theft, Julian yelled, turning to the corporate lawyer, a shark named Henderson. Sue her, arrest her, she stole my property. Henderson took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Actually, Julian, I've been reviewing the employment contracts and the prenup all morning. And Elena never signed an employment contract, Henderson said quietly. She was never an employee. You insisted on keeping her off the payroll to simplify the taxes. Remember, Julian froze. He remembered. He had been so cheap, so arrogant, he didn't want to pay payroll taxes for his wife. And regarding the prenup, Henderson continued flipping a page. Clause 12 states that all intellectual property created by the spouse prior to formal employment remains the sole property of the creator. Since she was never employed technically, she was a volunteer consultant. She owns her code. She took her ball and went home. "I'm the CEO," Julian roared. "I built this company." "You built the brand," the chairman of the board, a heavy-set man named Mr. Sterling, no relation to Silas, ironically stood up. "But you didn't build the product. And without the product, the brand is worthless." The chairman looked at the other board members. They all nodded in unison. "Julian Thorne," the chairman said formally, "in light of the catastrophic loss of intellectual property, the collapse of the Tanaka deal, and your erratic public behavior, the board is invoking Article 25. "No," Julian whispered. "We are removing you as CEO effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." "You can't do this to me. I am Thorne Data." Julian lunged toward the head of the table, but two large security guards stepped out of the shadows. They grabbed Julian by the arms. "Get your hands off me!" Julian shrieked as they dragged him toward the door. "I'll sue you all. I'll burn this place to the ground." They dragged him down the hallway past the glass-walled offices where his employees watched in stunned silence. They dragged him to the elevator down to the lobby and threw him out onto the sidewalk of the financial district. Julian landed on his hands and knees. His tuxedo shirt was torn. His expensive watch scratched against the concrete. It was raining again, just like the night Elena left. He sat there on the wet pavement, gasping for breath. Passers-by walked around him, ignoring him. To them, he was just another Wall Street casualty, another suit who bet big and lost. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands. It was a text from Monica. "Hey, Jay, saw the news." "Yikes." "Look, I'm going to Cabo with some friends for a while. The engagement ring is fake BTW. I had it appraised." "You cheap bastard, don't call me." Julian let the phone drop into a puddle. He looked up at the massive glass tower he had built. The logo Thorne Data loomed above him, but as he watched, a worker on a crane was already up there. They were beginning to dismantle the sign. He had wanted to be free of his boring wife. He had wanted excitement. He had wanted the world. Now he had exactly what he started with before he met Elena, nothing. But the story wasn't quite over, because while Julian sat in the rain a block away, a black Bentley idled at the curb. Inside, Elena watched the scene on a tablet streaming the news feed. "Satisfied?" Silas asked from the seat beside her. Elena watched Julian scream at the sky. She felt a twinge of sadness, not for the man he was now, but for the man he could have been if he hadn't let his ego consume him. "No," Elena said, closing the tablet cover. "Not satisfied, just finished." "He's ruined," Silas observed. "The SEC will investigate him for fraud. He'll be lucky to stay out of prison." "That's his journey now," Elena said, turning to face Silas. "We have work to do. Tanaka is waiting at the airport. We have a company to build." "To Vance Sterling," Silas said, raising a glass of sparkling water from the car's console. "To the future," Elena replied, clinking her glass against his. "Driver," Silas said. "Teterboro." As the Bentley pulled away, merging seamlessly into the traffic, Elena didn't look back at the man in the rain. She looked forward toward the horizon where the sun was just beginning to break through the clouds. She had walked through the fire, and she hadn't just survived. She had ascended. The bell above the door of Tech Fix, a cramped repair shop in a Jersey City strip mall, chimed with an annoying high-pitched ding. "I'll be right with you," Julian muttered. He was hunched over a cracked iPhone, squinting through a magnifying glass. His hands, once manicured and used only for signing checks and holding crystal tumblers, were now rough-stained with flux and grease. "Hurry up, buddy. I got places to be." A teenager snapped, drumming his fingers on the glass counter. Julian took a deep breath, swallowing the rage that still simmered in his gut. He handed the phone over. "That will be $80. The kid threw 4 crumpled 20s at him and walked out without a thank you. Julian Thorne, or Julian Smith, as his name tag now read, sat back on his stool. The fall had been absolute. The SEC investigation hadn't sent him to prison, but the fines and lawsuits had taken everything. The penthouse, the cars, the reputation. Even Monica had sold him out to the tabloids before moving to Dubai. He stood up to grab a mop. It was closing time. But as he walked toward the back, the wall of televisions in the electronics store next door flickered to a global broadcast. "And now we go live to the New York Stock Exchange for the largest IPO in tech history." Julian stopped. A magnetic pull drew him to the display window. The screen showed the balcony of the NYSE crowded with cheering people. But in the center, holding the gavel, was a woman. She looked radiant. Gone were the gray cardigans of her past. She wore a white power suit, crisp and modern. It was Elena. Next to her stood Silas Sterling, looking proud but standing a step behind her. This was her moment. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, SVI Sterling Vance Intelligence. $250 valuation, $40 billion. The reporter's voice boomed over the speakers. Elena Vance, the genius behind the Nemesis Protocol, has built an empire in just 12 months. Ms. Vance, to what do you attribute your success? You were unknown a year ago. Elena looked directly into the camera. For a second, Julian felt she was staring right through the glass window in Jersey City, straight into his soul. I attribute it to silence, Elena said calmly. For a long time, I let someone else speak for me. I was afraid of being seen. But I learned that sometimes you have to burn your old life to the ground to find the diamond in the ashes. Any words for your detractors? For the people who said you were just a housewife? The reporter asked. Elena laughed, a free, genuine sound. I don't have any words for them. I don't think about them at all. She brought the gavel down. Clang. Confetti rained down on screen. Julian stood frozen on the sidewalk. Tears pricked his eyes, hot, bitter tears. He realized the truth. He wasn't her enemy anymore. He wasn't even a memory. He was just a glitch she had patched out of her life. Hey, buddy! A large man was banging on the counter of the repair shop behind him. I need this iPad fixed. Now. The sign says you're open for 2 more minutes. Julian looked at the man. He looked at the confident, powerful woman on the screen fading into the commercial break. He looked at his own name tag, Julian Smith. He lowered his head. Yes, sir, Julian whispered, the fight finally gone from his voice. Right away, sir. He walked back to his stool and picked up his screwdriver. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing over the city. But high above the clouds, Elena Vance was flying toward a future that had no limit. She had accepted the divorce quietly, but the noise of her success would echo forever, and that is how the woman who was told to go quietly ended up making the loudest noise in history. Julian thought he could erase Elena, but he forgot the most important rule of nature: you should never underestimate the quiet ones. They are the ones observing, learning, and planning. While Julian chased the flash of the camera, Elena owned the lens. What do you think? Did Julian deserve his fate in that repair shop, or was it too harsh? And would you have had the courage to walk away with nothing but a pen and a secret like Elena did? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a homeless man who wins the lottery and buys the bank that evicted him. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.